Good evening. I'm Creed Pogue, lay leader at Westside United Methodist Church, delivering this message for January 30th, 2022. This is actually my second take. Somehow the camera didn't like it and I was halfway through. So we're trying again. So with the weather, we didn't have service today. Pastor Dave and some other people did a lot of work getting the area cleared, but we're still concerned with how things were going to look in the morning, since it's supposed to be even colder than it was today. So for the last 3 weeks, Pastor Dave had been giving us messages on spiritual gifts, and he had asked me to give the fourth and probably final installment on that. And I had to admit that when he asked me that, I was kind of thinking of a cartoon I had seen years ago. It was actually dates back to 1981, where the old senior pastor tells the new associate that, well, they'll handle Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and Easter, whereas the new associate is supposed to handle the role of women, tongue speaking for today, biblical inerrancy, and the special Fund Drive Sunday. And so I was trying to figure how some of that was going to come together for today, but we'll see how all that comes together. One of the first things that I was realizing as I did research was that we really don't have a specific list of what spiritual gifts are. Some people will say there's 16 of them, some people will say there's 20, and even then they don't include things like music. Certainly, I know that that's not a gift that I possess, but my wife Becky, voice of an angel when she sings, and so that is definitely talent on loan from God. There's three main areas of the Bible that talk about spiritual gifts. The 12th chapter of First Corinthians in a couple of spots. Also, the 12th chapter of Romans, verses 6 through 8, and the 4th chapter of Ephesians, verses 11 through 13. You may want to look at those over time, help get a better understanding on some things. Obviously, Pastor Dave over the last 3 weeks talked about faith, knowledge, wisdom, evangelism, serving, and hospitality. And so, as I was looking at this, I found there were three different ways that I had found, and there are more available, to talk about or to group various gifts. One of them is nurturing, being the first one, and that would be you helping other people in the congregation, outreaching. Generally work that we do to help the least, the last, the lost, people who are in need. Witness is us moving out into the world to bring God's word to people who don't have it. And there's organizing to help make sure all the rest of that works well and comes together. Another way to divide them is support. Again, that helping the people in the congregation, teaching specifically, leading and administrating, outreach, and signs of power. Finally, a third one was motivational, gifts of ministry, and gifts that manifest from God. And I also found that there were a couple different ways to be able to talk about some of the gifts, the way adults do it and the way students do it. And the way students do it, some of that seemed to also be a little easier to understand. I'm going to stay away from the more special gifts, which we look at as signs of power or manifestation of God, and focus more on gifts that we all have. The question is, what do we do with them? And so, for instance, one of those gifts would be exhortation or encouragement. That's from Romans 12. we all have the ability to encourage. Let me go back on the special part for a moment. I wanted to do that. Because the special stuff could be stuff like healing, miracles, um, some specific teaching, but prophecy, tongues and the interpretation of tongues. That's how I don't talk about that today. Or the gift of being an apostle or a pioneer, missionaries, we would think of in that category. But instead, things that we can all do, we should all be doing, we should all try to work on lifting up, doing better. And so, like I said, that first one being exhortation or encouragement, because everyone can use a good word, everyone can use a lift up. And it doesn't cost any of us anything to do that. And so when we have people who are working forward for the kingdom, then we should be doing what we can to lift them up and encourage them to continue doing that. And related to that can also be helping or supporting, whether that's doing little things that help move a project along, or again, trying to help keep people lifted up by showing that it's not just them by themselves, but giving them the knowledge that other people are interested and are wanting to help them. Those are things all of us can do. We just have to put in, make the time to do it. And that's a struggle for all of us, but it is something we should continue to work on, that we should try to do as we perform our walk. Contributing and giving, that's also in Romans 12. And too often when we talk about giving, we only talk about money. And not that money isn't important. It certainly is. Jesus actually talked more about money than anything else. The widow's mite was one of his examples on that, where people gave of what they had. It wasn't the people who gave large amounts that Jesus praised. It was the people who didn't have much but gave that in faith going forward. And we all have, something. And so we should try to put that forward. But also, in addition to treasure, is time and talents. And again, those are things that we can contribute, even if we don't have a lot of treasure to put in. We have time. We all have various talents to help out, and we should be doing that. And again, none of those things are beneath any of us. If we have to help, clean stuff up or do the spraying, keep things at your church safe or anything like that, those are all things that we all need to get our hands dirty and do and spend the time on, because all of those help move things forward. Other gifts include things like shepherding or mentoring. We all have areas of knowledge that we can add to, or certainly even by leading by example of showing people what to avoid doing. If I did X and that did not go well, that may help other people know why that particular path is not a good one to take. And so if we're able to help people with that, then we are benefiting everybody. We are helping everyone, and we should do that as much as we can. And there may be areas that we have knowledge that most other people don't, or people who do have it haven't made it available, and so we're the best that there is. And so we should not be shy about putting that forward and moving ahead and helping, again, build the kingdom as much as we can wherever we can. We can also look at things like leadership and directing. And that doesn't mean being in charge of, 50 or 100 or 1,000 people. It may be that you're helping to guide one or two other people. But doing various things, as we get into the spring, summer, and fall, once the snow's gone, maybe things like helping outside with getting things cleaned up, or just helping to make sure that when we're having various things, that everything gets put back away, or bringing everything out that we need to have. There's all those different things that we can help with, but often we need someone to take a little bit of leadership and helping to direct those activities. And, we all then participate, even as a leader or director, but we're helping overall to make sure that it's getting done in a timely way, getting done as well as we can. All of those things add up, again, to helping to build the kingdom. And so that needs our attention. And it can be little things that we may think of it as little things, but all of it together becomes very important. Then there's also discernment, discerning, distinguishing spirits. That's something I think that I have a gift for, but it's something that we can all do. After all, we're always called upon to figure out good from evil. And, even for Pastor Dave or Pastor Alicia, or, if you want to look at any of the rest of us, we're not going to be around all the time. And so each of us needs to develop the tools to make those decisions, to decide what should be done, and at least as important, what shouldn't be done. And having an understanding of what's important as far as those decisions and what we may be able to work with. And some of that comes from time, some of that comes from discussing, some of that comes from being able to listen and try to understand, and then we can all come together to make a decision. Because discernment isn't just one person. Discernment needs to come from everybody, because after all, if you don't feel comfortable with the path, we're all human. We're likely not to pursue that path as vigorously as we should. And sometimes then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure, and we want to avoid doing that. And there's a difference between discerning problems and just doubting. Keep in mind that when Moses was taking everybody out of Israel, the Israelites out of Egypt, there were a lot of doubters. Some people thought, we should just go back, and other people just wanted to get rid of Moses. They didn't really have any alternatives. And we need to make sure we know the difference between, are there problems? Because after all, even Moses had his flaws, versus just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, or even worse, sabotaging. That's where discernment comes in. Distinguishing spirits is another way to look at that. That's the language from 1 Corinthians. Are there good spirits or bad spirits? Which ones are we listening to? And all of those are things that each of us can do. Even for, administration and organizing. Again, that may go back to the leading and the directing. That it doesn't have to be that, I couldn't direct 1,000 people, so I can't do it at all. It may be that there's various projects that only need one or two other people, but we do need someone to know that, okay, we can count on you to help bring those other couple of people with you, and that we know things will be on time and we can get things done. And we're all therefore doing a part of, again, building the kingdom, because the kingdom does not build itself. These are not self-executing things. These aren't things that just spontaneously generate God is eternal. God will be here no matter what we do. But the thing is, if we are Christians, then we want to be moving things forward. And we want to uh, make the kingdom more than it was before we got there. Um, that's not for ego purposes, but to uh, having contributed toward the kingdom. That's what we're all called to do. And so it's important that we all do that. Um, with prophecy, prophetic, I know I said that's more of a special thing. It kind of depends too on what parts we're talking about. Because if we look at prophecy of predicting the future, that you got a vision, a literal vision, and like a seer, Delphi, oracles, etc. That's one thing. I move that off to the side. But the other is, if you see someone being hurt or abused, speaking out is being prophetic. Helping that person who's in danger is prophetic, is a work of God. After all, think of it this way with Jesus, when there was the fallen woman, and his example to everybody was, hey, let the one without sin cast the first stone. But it's that willingness to move in and help. And unfortunately, one of the biggest things that we find is the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And if we're going to be, as we often are, in a situation where we may be the only Christian that a person sees today, are we the ones that cross the street moving away from them, or are we the people who try to help? And that help doesn't have to be fighting every battle and solving every problem, but just of, again, if that person's being attacked, letting the attacker know, hey, there's other people out here. In then situations, they may want them just running because they don't want to deal with the rest of it. They don't know exactly where you are, what you're doing, how many others are with you, or whatever. And so those are all important things. And so those gifts, whether encouragement, supporting, giving, directing, organizing, even discerning and speaking out and mentoring, are all things that we can each do and that don't require some sort of special manifestation. There are things that have already been given to us by our Creator that are things from the Holy Spirit that we just need to be able and willing to tap. And so those are gifts that we can each use every day, probably at least once a week, in order to build the kingdom, in order for people to know we are Christians by our love, and in order to help move things forward. And so with that, I'm going to leave you for now. And thank you very much. And I hope everybody stays safe. And I look forward to seeing you next week.